This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Hey, welcome to this week's show. We have another terrific interview and comedy set for you. One of the guys that was a regular at my clubs all through the late 80s and mostly through the 90s. He's a magician. He's a comic. He's an all-around great guy. Ladies and gentlemen, let's introduce our interviewee for today, Greg Otto. Greg is in the house.
That sounded genuine, too.
Well, it's so great to hear you, man. It's been way too long. You were one of the headliners that we used consistently in the 90s, and it's just great to be able to chat and get you on the podcast. Life treating you okay?
You. Oh, yeah, I'm great. It's nice to hear your voice.
I did 2 weeks a year for you for years and years and years. Oh, yeah. No, I know. In fact, one of the interesting things was I still have my old booking books. I thought originally I booked you as a magician.
Yes, 1 week in 1980. I remember this week because it was Barry Sobel opening, me in the middle, and Dana Carvey closing.
Yeah, I always tried to have magicians in the middle. That was kind of a format I picked up early on. You worked with Carvey and Barry Sobel. Boy, talk about a name out of the past.
Yes, exactly. But that's, it's a good show. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, great show. And you were doing pure magic then, or was it kind of a combo?
I was doing comedy magic, but I got rid of that quickly because it wasn't working in comedy clubs. That's not what I wanted to do.
Well, there's always more work for a straight stand-up than a magician.
Well, I was doing both, so I was working all the time. But I know what you mean. Yeah,
I just meant straight magicians, I think, had a more difficult time getting work in comedy clubs. I was one of the few club owners that really appreciated a variety of art forms, not just straight stand-up. Some people would put their nose up towards me because, ooh, you use jugglers and magicians? Oh, my God, pretty soon you'll have a mime,
Oh, well, how would you like to be one of those magicians or jugglers that people say that about? That's what's happening to me.
It was crazy how some people didn't really appreciate all the art forms of entertainment. But, let's kind of get things rolling. I know you're originally out of Canada. How did you get into magic and stand-up comedy?
Well, I was actually born in Pennsylvania, but I grew up all over the place. I lived in 22 different houses growing up. So
my bad. My research said that you were in Ontario at one point.
I did live in Ontario for 9 years, in Windsor, Ontario, which is about 200,000 people, right across the river from Detroit. But anyway, I was a kid magician. I got a magic set when I was 7, and I fiddled with that and got more into it and stuff. But I wanted to be a comedian. I started writing jokes. I loved George Carlin when I was a kid. And Franklin Ajaye. Those are the two guys I really liked.
Franklin Ajaye. I bet people don't know that name as well as Carlin, but he was a great entertainer.
Yeah, he got some funny jokes. Anyway, I was in Windsor, and I went to university there. And one day in the local Detroit paper, there's just like a tiny 1-inch thing notice that this comedy club was opening in Detroit. And they were looking to call if you were interested in performing there.
Was that
before the comedy? That's Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle.
Yeah, the Castle, Mark's place. Oh, that's a great club. Amazing.
Yeah, January of '79 was the first time I did stand-up. January 5th, I want to say. So here's the weird thing. So I call him up, and he goes, "Yeah." And so I go to his office. I forget what he was doing really, and I had some jokes written on a piece of paper, and I kind of read them to him in his office. He goes, "Yeah, those are funny." Come to a set. So, meanwhile, let's backtrack a little bit. I had been performing 200 or 300 magic shows a year, doing at schools.
So the childhood interest in magic took off to where you were doing actual shows during your high school and college days.
Right. That was my job. Like I did a whole summer at an amusement park. And
really?
I did hundreds of school shows and libraries and old age homes.
So you were a professional making money early on. That probably gave you some great experience in stage awareness.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to get to. So when my first time doing stand-up, usually these guys, their first time are women, people. The first 3 minutes is they're figuring out how to use a mic stand. I've seen it so many times.
Exactly.
But you know what I mean? You've seen that, right? Yeah. So I knew how to use a mic, and I knew how to work a crowd, so that's years of hassle out the window because I already know how to do that. So I believe my first time, usually comics, in LA, they could do 3 minutes or something your first time. I think I got to do like 15 or 20 minutes. He goes, how long can you do? It was one of those, they didn't have any comedians really back then, like a handful. So I got lucky that way, and Mark started using me all the time in his just like a weekend room in like the basement of a restaurant or something.
Were you able to do 10, 15 minutes that early?
I did, yeah.
That's incredible.
So, thank you. So then he started to have me on weekends, and I did that for a couple months for free. And keep in mind, I was driving from another country, from Canada. You have to go under a tunnel under the river and drive another half hour to get there. So one night, after a couple months, Mark takes me in his back room, and he gives me $10, and he goes, don't tell the other comedians. So it was my first time getting paid for comedy.
Oh, he wasn't paying at the time?
No.
Oh, see, I opened in 1980, but I was paying comics from the get-go, not open micers, of course.
But you were a week-long open-middle headliner room. This is a 6 or 8 comics workout room.
Okay.
Yeah, this is
like the Holy City Zoo or the other cafe or something. Yeah. Early on. Okay. Well, I know the store wasn't paying comics, at least not much, for many years.
Right. So here's what happened with the Comedy Store. When that strike happened, and immediately when the Comedy Store strike happened, I believe Bud immediately settled and decided he wasn't going to deal with strikes, and he just capitulated. But the Detroit comics decided to go on strike, but I happened to be doing a weekend out-of-town gig that weekend. So I came back and missed the whole having to choose sides going on a strike thing, and it had already been settled, and all of a sudden now we were getting paid.
Well, lucky you.
Because I went out of town, I come back, and I go, oh, by the way, we get paid now. And I didn't have to look like a bad guy.
Right, because some guys that formulated those protests were blackballed for years.
Oh, yes. But there were like the core 6, here's who I started with in Detroit: Tim Allen, Dave Coulier, myself, Sheila Kay, Tony Hayes, Wayne Brinston, Lowell Sanders. You must know Lowell, right?
Yeah, some good people came out of there.
Yeah.
Most people think of New York and L.A. and Boston, but there was a comedy scene in Mark.
Especially. Binder used to work out of there, too.
Oh, Mike Binder?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He just moved to L.A., I believe, but he'd pop in once in a while because he's from there.
Well, good group of people to work with.
Yeah. I remember doing shows for free pizza with Tim Allen and Dave Coulier. Remember this place where we got pizza?
Oh, that's so funny. We when we were just getting started and we were trying to do a 6-night-a-week club, there would be certain Tuesdays and Wednesdays where we always tried to have at least 10 people in the audience, but we had done shows to very small crowds, and they always ended up being really fun because it's so lax and improvish, but it's great experience to have. I mean, it's kind of the same as doing a room of 1,000 or 2,000 people. It's a different dynamic, and it's good experience to get under your belt. Oh, yeah.
I've had lots of fun I've had more fun with a small crowd that's into it than a big crowd that isn't.
Oh, I could see that.
Anytime.
Yeah, I can see that. So you've been we were working out of Detroit and the Comedy Castle. When did you?
Right, and then all of a sudden, then all these other gigs started opening in Detroit, like early 79, early 80. The comedy boom was sort of starting, so they started having discos would have a comedy night, and whatever this pizza place was. I remember this place called Jack's Detour, which is a pool hall with a stage on it where I assume they usually had bands. And there were pool tables between you and the audience. That was a good one.
Oh, that would be a bit of a challenge. When I first opened, it was in a banquet room with poles and low-hanging chandeliers right in front of the face of the comics.
Oh, sure, of course.
But, anything would do during that time because it was really an emerging new industry. I've mentioned before in other podcasts that there was stand-up comedy before 1980, but it was a lot of times it was a break between bands in a jazz club or a break between strippers at a strip joint. There was no...
They were opening acts for name singers and stuff. Yeah.
Right. There wasn't any, per se, comedy clubs until the late 70s. And then, like you said, the boom really hit in the 80s. And I caught it just right, opening in August of 1980. So I felt very
really? I moved
lucky.
to LA in May of 1980.
Oh, wow. Well, let's bring that up. Do you remember, because sadly I don't, your first time or how you got introduced to Laughs?
To your club, I was with Mark Gervitz, was managing me, who's now, I think he's at Burlstein Gray or something, or wherever the hell he is. And he booked me there. I didn't have anything to do with it. He was booking my comedy club.
So you were one of the few acts I got through an agency. That didn't happen very often, but I did use his group, William Morris, occasionally to bring in new talent when the talent pool was a little thinner in those days.
Right, and he really had his hustle on. So, that was a fun. I remember that there was a 2-bedroom condo, and Barry Sobel and I were supposed to share the open or middle bedroom, which didn't happen. He slept on the couch all week, thankfully.
Yeah, we were learning and growing. I do remember the 2-bedroom. We did expand that in later years. But again, that was still better than some clubs offered. I know a lot of comics were sleeping in their cars and getting hotel rooms.
Oh, right. And I remember it was a nice condo, which just needed another bedroom. I remember it being actually pretty nice. So then I didn't work your club for many years because, I don't know, for whatever reason. And then 10 years later, I started doing it all the time. But by this point, I was headlining. And last time I actually worked for you, I came up there about 12 years ago. And remember this? You booked me on some event at in a barn at some kind of a raffle. You know what I'm talking about?
I still do about 4 or 5. We didn't do any recently, but we used to book 4 to 6 fundraisers. And you were at a Colusa Fire Department fundraiser in Colusa, California, out in the middle of nowhere. And we converted this state fair warehouse into they would have a dinner, and we did a show, and they'd have a huge raffle. And I was bringing people in from L.A. for that because it was a pretty big event. There was several hundred people. And
it was a good paying gig, I remember.
Yeah, and we did it for 18 years. It was a pretty long-running gig. But if you did one of those, then that was great, and thank you. Those were always fun to book. They did eventually they quit doing those fundraisers, and so we lost that gig. But it was one of those things that I was able to keep doing to keep my finger in the entertainment pool. I think one of the hardest things for me selling the club was losing that creative aspect of my life, and I was doing these fundraisers and emceeing at different places just to kind of keep my creative juices going. I mean, I love the industry, which is obvious because I'm doing the podcast. But I remember you. I do remember you doing magic, but I remember bringing you in as a headliner. And like you said, for many years, and I believe you worked all 3 of the clubs at one point.
No, I don't think so. I worked your first room, wherever that was, with Barry and Dana. And then I just worked the old SAC room.
Oh, really?
Anytime.
You never worked Birdcage or Stockton, huh?
No.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. Now, do you have any memories of working the club? Did you enjoy the shows? I wouldn't
have come back. I didn't want to go there if I didn't like it.
Well, that's good. I mean, some people do it for the money, yeah.
Oh. No, I always had fun in Sacramento. We drove that old beat-up car, which I would remember. I was at your club every 6 months. I remember nobody ever washed the car in that interim or probably put gas in it. Because seriously, my first order of business was there was a little car wash by the house we stayed at. And I'd go spend $2 to wash this thing. It was held together by dirt, it looked like at one point.
Oh, the
comics, we got food wrappers and stuff. I'm a tidy guy, but not every comic is, I guess.
Well, no, they aren't, and they're not much for taking care of either comedy condos or transportation. But so by the time, just to let the audience know, your memories now was after the 2-bedroom condo, we did go to a larger condo in Governor Square, next door to the then governor at the time, which always cracked the comics up. But by the time, what you're talking about is we had purchased a house in the Natomas area, and that's what we were using to house the entertainers. And because it was a little farther away from the club, we provided a car, which most clubs won't do. But, we were special.
Because I can count the amount of cars I've got at clubs on one hand. Houston Laugh Stop gave you a car, too.
Yeah, it was pretty rare and probably pretty risky, but knock on wood, in all the years that we did it, we didn't have any major problems with, anybody getting a DUI or an accident. So that bodes well for the talent I booked.
Yeah. Well, now, if somebody's a troublemaker, you just don't have them back.
Right. I mean, that's been a clear part of the managing a comedy club is going through and finding the right people and then bringing them back and weeding out the ones you didn't want to work with for one reason or another. But you were a very successful headliner and worked many times for me. And as you reminded me, even after doing some of these fundraisers. Now, I know at some point you really made your money doing cruises. When did you first start doing cruises?
Well, I first started doing cruise. I did my first cruise right after I moved to L.A. I moved here. I had already worked the Magic Castle once when I still lived in Canada. So I was moving to L.A., and they never booked anybody 2 weeks in a row. But I wrote them a letter, and I explained my story that I was moving here, blah, blah, blah. They booked me in 2 different rooms, back-to-back weeks, which is not – I haven't heard of anybody doing that since, so thank you, Magic Castle. So I moved here on a Sunday. Monday started at the Castle. The next week was in one of the smaller rooms there, and Mark Gervitz, the manager, just happened to be there and saw me and goes, "Hey, have you ever done a cruise?" I go, "No." "Well, want to do one next week?" So
wow.
I moved to L.A.
Talk about lucky.
I know. I was here 10 days, and so he booked me on a cruise. I didn't have a passport or anything, so I had to go get an emergency passport thing. So I literally had 4 days off after the Castle and then flew to Miami to go to this ship. And I was just supposed to do 2 weeks, but when I was flying home, I was sitting in the lobby of the ship waiting for a ride to the airport, and this agent in the lobby, he's going, "Does anybody know where I can find Greg Otto?" And I'm like, "I'm Greg Otto." He goes, "You want to do a cruise?" "Oh, okay." So somebody else had fallen out on the ship docked right behind the one I was getting off of. So I just went over there, and then I did a few more cruises, and then it was always one of those things that always were cruise gigs. But I really got into doing them a lot when the comedy boom started drying up in 91, 92, and a lot of clubs were closing, the money was crappy, and I got tired of all the flying, so there was this cruise line, Royal Caribbean, had a couple ships that sailed out of L.A., so I didn't have to fly. But the first real perk of why I wanted to do them was I just got sick of going to the airport and all that goes along with that.
Wow. Well,
then they started working.
Oh, I was going to backtrack just a little and say, yes, it was rare to work 2 weeks in a row, and getting that at the Comedy Castle was a real bonus for you. Magic Castle. Our only opportunity, the only time we ever did it was Paula Poundstone was the only act in the history of the club that worked back-to-back weeks, just as a little bit
I love Paula
trivia.
Poundstone.
Yeah, and she was brand new out of Boston. She was an opening act, and we worked her because we liked her, and we were helping her develop. And, that's where she met some key people out of San Francisco that really helped her career. But, okay, and then moving forward, we should point out to the podcast audience that not only are you a very funny and talented and experienced headliner, but you were one of the cleaner comics, and that is what made you more acceptable to the cruise lines, I'm assuming. Because you were doing family shows.
Right. Later on, they added an adult show. So, and this is the tricky part, is you do a clean show, and then maybe that night or a couple nights later, you do an adult show. And they stopped using, this is funny, you should bring up the working clean thing, because after I'd been at Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines for many years, they stopped using a few comedians who didn't have a clean show and a dirty show, because it sort of became a requirement to have both, which not everybody can do, you know.
Oh, definitely. But you were able to do that. I've seen you do both.
Yeah, we just throw in a few swear words, and it's an adult show. The trick I learned from Jimmy Alec in 1980.
Well, again, another great reference of a comic that was a terrific headliner in a regular club. And what's funny is he was really from the 70s, where he had appeared already on television and a couple other things, and we were able to work with him early on in the 80s. But Jimmy Alec gave you that little bit of advice, or was somebody to emulate when it came to being able to be clean and dirty?
Yeah, I don't know. I just remember he told me that in the hallway of the Comedy Store when I first moved to LA. I don't know how it came up or what we were talking about, but it always stuck with me.
Wow.
And it's a simple trick. You just,
Right. You don't have to rewrite your act. You just have to.
Yeah, but I do have a couple jokes that you wouldn't want to tell with kids in the audience, even though they're not necessarily dirty.
Right, or innuendo jokes or something that would make it a little bit more colorful, you could say, for that adult show. Now, in your cruises, you did a lot of them in the 90s and into the 2000s. I saw that you've hit like 65 countries.
Yeah, I've been all over the place. I went to every continent one year.
In 1 year, you hit every continent?
Yeah.
Oh, that must have been exciting. And now, were you one of the guys that would just stay on the ship, or did you get off and kind of take advantage of where you were?
I always got off, unless it had to be raining really hard for me not to get off the ship. No, I got off everywhere. Yeah, I have friends. This is funny. I flew to Nice, France, to get on a ship in Cannes, and I couldn't wait to go check out south of France. And the other comic is just in his room watching TV, and I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I don't know what there is to do in France." I go, "Well, me neither. Let's go find out."
Did he go with you?
Some people aren't that touristy. Yeah, I had to promise to buy him a drink if it came in booked to Cannes with me.
Well, that's why I brought it up, is that I've talked to a couple other comics that have done a lot of cruises, and they said that, after you've kind of done it, let's say you've been to the Mexican port 3 or 4 or 5 times, there's no reason to get off. And I'm thinking, well, just to get your land legs and not be sitting in the cabin, I would think it would be a good experience. But everybody's got a different cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly. No, some people just, can't. You have to beg them to go with you to go do something. But I don't get it. I always went everywhere. And in fact, I would be the last person back on the ship and get back as late as possible.
Wow. Yeah. And like I said, we've done our share of cruises. I guess I didn't say, but Jill and I, after we sold the club, owned a travel agency for a few years and did a lot of cruises. And I always made a point of being one of the last people back on the ship. 1, to avoid the crowds, and 2, you got more time on the shore, even if you're just sitting in a bar having a beer.
Right. Now, did you see what cruise lines did you favor? And did you see any comedians?
Yeah, we did. We didn't make a point of going to all the big fanfare shows because just being 20 plus years in the business, it wasn't in fact, even since we've sold the club, I've been to a limited number of clubs to see comedy just because kind of been there, done that. We did Royal Caribbean. We did a few others, Carnival. One time, probably the most interesting as a travel agent is we went out of New Orleans and we did a cruise to nowhere. They were launching a new ship, and we went out about 30, 40 miles. The bars were open and free. We cruised around for like 2 days and came back.
Oh, that's cool. I never did one of those.
Yeah, well, it was they were trying to show off this new ship so we'd all sell it.
Oh, I know what. Yeah, it's what's that called, a fam cruise or something, right?
Right. Well, at the time they called it the cruise to nowhere, just for agents. It was
right.
But we enjoyed it because it wasn't as crowded. They get maybe 200 or 300 agents instead of 2,000 or 3,000 tourists.
Oh, right. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it was a nice way to experience a cruise. So going back to the history of Greg Otto and show business, you were a professional magician for many years. Then you became a professional stand-up, and then you took that stand-up and turned it into a career doing cruises. Now, you and I haven't worked together, as you mentioned, in 13 to 15 years. And you have you continued that plan? Has it been the same?
Well, my plan was to retire as soon as possible. So I actually retired from traveling when I was 55, which is not bad. And mostly, like I said, I got tired of flying because Royal Caribbean pulled out their 2 ships that used to go to Mexico. So now I had to fly all the time. And sometimes it got brutal. I in fact, worked every time I heard a cruise line had a ship that sailed in or out of L.A., I was all over it. I worked Celebrity, Princess, Royal Caribbean.
So for our podcast audience, what do you think was the best cruise line or the best ships?
Oh, well, for me, the best audiences are Royal Caribbean for some reason.
Well, they were kind of the fun boats. I mean, I know they always sell Carnival as the party boat, but I remember Royal Caribbean being very fun as well.
Yeah, they have great crowds. I would, if I chose to go on a cruise, I'd choose Celebrity. I used to work for them, but their crowds aren't so great. And Princess has good pizza and shitty crowds.
Oh, really?
That's my assessment.
Well, you had all the experience, so that assessment carries some weight. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And now there was kind of a boom for comics in the late 80s doing some television. Did you make some of those show appearances?
Oh, I did all those bad cable shows.
Oh, did you?
Improv, Comic Strip Live, Comedy Tonight, Improv. And I even did a half-hour version nobody's ever heard of Evening at the Improv called Improv Tonight. What else did I do? I did a bunch of those. Yeah.
There was a flurry in the late 80s when comedy was really at its peak that if you were a quality, clean headliner, there was this kind of cornucopia of shows that you could appear on doing guest sets in 2 and 3 minute sets for. I thought I'd seen you, and I just wanted to validate that I was right, that you had done a bunch of those.
I did. Can I tell you the story? I did 2 comedy shows in one night. I was at Big B's taping Comedy Express, which was a Fox show that was on 5 nights a week, believe it or not, with 3 comics and a host. So I do Comedy Express at Big B's. I change jackets. I drive 10 minutes up the street to Santa Monica Improv and did Evening at the Improv there. So this was my biggest day in show business.
That sounds like a great day.
I showed up at Evening at the Improv, and they go, they wanted to do my makeup. I go, yeah, I've already got makeup. I just did another show. So I'm like a big shot. I'm good.
Thank you, but I know what I'm doing. Well, you've been in the business and a lot of road work for a lot of years. I'm glad you're off the road pretty much these days because it can really beat you up. Was there any interesting moments or anybody you got to work with that really made being in the business special?
Oh, I got to work with everybody. Name somebody. I couldn't narrow it down. And plus, the other thing is when you're getting to see all these people for free too when you go do gigs with name people,
Right. If you're on the show, you get to hang backstage with them and stuff. I always enjoy dropping into the Tonight Show, or whether it was Jay or Johnny, I could hang out in the green room, and you're sitting there with big movie and TV stars. It's kind of exhilarating.
Right. So yeah, show business is fun.
Like you said, you kind of quasi-retired about 7 years ago. Is that what you said?
September 10th, 2013.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you had a successful career, and obviously it paid off for you financially because you were able to get off the road and retire. So, but I imagine, do you still do an occasional fundraiser?
No, I haven't. My last gig, and thank God my last gig went well, was in March. I opened for Bobby Slayton at a club. And that was my last stand-up set. And like I said, thank God I went out with a good set because I'm sure some people's last shows suck and they can't get back in the saddle.
Right. You want to end on a high note so that.
Oh God! There's that saying you're only as good as your last show or whatever it is. And if your last show blew, I don't know what to tell you.
Well, luckily, I've been able to wrangle up a set that you did for me back in the 90s that I'm going to play for the audience. Before we move into a little Greg Otto stand-up comedy, is there anything you'd like to share with the podcast audience and your experiences through working at Laughs or being in the business or doing the cruises?
Haven't I already told you enough stuff? Let's see what else you got. I don't know.
No,
I want to know what this. what's this set you're going to be playing, and how long is it? And do I have to listen to it?
No. I'm going to put it on after the interview, and it's about 3.5 minutes, and it was material you were known for doing back in the late 80s, early 90s. I think you'll recognize it. And it's just good, clean comedy fun, but it does show the way you work the room and the way your entertainment and personality comes out through your material. It's interesting because a lot of comics are monologists, but it's all about attitude. I mean, Bobby Slayton is as funny as Jay Leno, is as funny as Dana Carvey, and yet all three are very relatable, but in a totally different fashion.
Right.
They come at it from a different angle with a different attitude, and I think you fall into that category, is that your material, as funny as it is, really is I don't want to be rude, but kind of sardonic, kind of or sarcastic,
I guess.
Yeah, kind of a sarcastic way of looking at everyday life. You know, for example, the bit about the mini soaps in the motels.
Oh yeah.
So everyone's experienced that. We're about to hear it, but everyone's experienced that. But you come at it with some very funny, kind of sarcastic, but very funny point of view on it.
Oh, well, thank you. That's nice of you.
Well, thank you for joining me today on the podcast. It's been great catching up, and I think that your experiences from going from magic into comedy and onto the cruises is a unique path that you took in show business, and I'm so glad you've been so successful. Congratulations.
No, that's nice of you. Thank you. And will you send me a link or something so I can plug this for people?
Oh, yeah. No. We'll make sure you're aware before it comes out. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Greg, for doing the interview. But right now, we're going to sit back and enjoy some terrific stand-up comedy by the one and only Greg Otto. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Do a lot of traveling with this job and stay in some skanky hotels. You ever notice the worse the hotel, the smaller the soap? I'm like lathering up with a chicklet. Look at that sud. The label says luxury bar. Oh, that is nice. I'm on holiday. I've had to do some shows in some weird places, boy. I had to do a show at a monastery once. Yeah, a monk actually broke a 20-year vow of silence just to yell out, "You suck!" I don't need that. This is a cool job. A friend of mine has like the worst job in the world. This is true. He sells telephones over the phone. You know, I think pretty much if you can answer the phone, you don't really need this guy, do you? It'd be like, hello? Oh, never mind. You're covered. All right, cool. He's got a new job selling doorbells door to door. Things are happening for this guy. People have been saying stupid stuff to me lately. I was at a store the other day. Some guy who works there says to me, "You're more than welcome." I'm more than welcome? Hey, and thank you to the second power. Thank ye thrice. Have you ever had someone come up to you and say, "Excuse me, do you have the correct time?" The correct time? No, I've got noon tomorrow, pal. Mom watches 17 hours fast for no apparent reason. Yeah, I've got the completely wrong time. It's not even close. Can I trouble you for the month? Also, I hate people, if you ask them what time it is, they say, "Oh, it's about 3 o'clock. Oh, you're a big help. I can guess, too. Now, we can launch the shuttle. He says it's about 3. How about people who say, "Is it hot in here, or is it just me?" It's you. When you leave, the temperature drops 10 degrees. How do you do that? You're good. You're very good. My brother's always saying that. "Does it stink in here, or is it just me?" Guess what?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was a very short sample of the very funny Greg Otto, who was live on stage back in about 1991. I hope you enjoyed that short set. We'll have more of Greg coming up in future podcasts. We want to thank Greg for participating in our interview and telling us all about his career and his life in the comedy world. He's been very successful. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with another terrific show. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.